Chile, 1970. Salvador Allende, a socialist, is elected president. Chile has enjoyed uninterrupted democracy since the turn of the century. The CIA, U.S. corporate leaders, and the Chilean military joined forces. General Augusto Pinochet leads the coup d'etat against Allende. The National Palace is bombed. Allende is assassinated.
I think in terms of the military coup and all that sort of thing, obviously I'm not going to have the same memories as people who were directly involved in it, but I remember chants, even to this day, sort of like they're in me, because I must have heard them said from when I was very, very young, because my dad would take me to the marches. So one chant that I won't forget is El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. These people united will never be defeated. And all the students and lots of people used to go on these marches, and it was all about social justice and equality and trying to, a lot of idealism. And when the military dictatorship, when the military started to take over, my mum and dad were, at this point, they were lecturers to the University of Conception. They'd been like engineering students before. Dad was a double first there, and they were very good students. So I think they were sort of like they got jobs straight away there at the university. And when the military, I think militia came to the university, they put machine guns in people's backs and loaded them. This is stuff that I've seen in documentaries, but I think my dad was thrown onto one of these trucks and just arrested. They just piled people on top of each other. Anyway, so while my dad was in prison, my mum took me to see him one day, and obviously I would be a toddler, so I was 2. And I must have felt the fear and everything in there. And I saw boots, a lot of boots, military boots. So actually, I had this fear of military boots. It just developed strangely. But when my mum was taking me away, she said that I just started shouting to the prisoners, lots of young people actually that were thrown in, as well as all sorts of ages really. But I started shouting, El pueblo unido jamás será vencido, which is people united will never be defeated. I was shouting to them, to people. My mum was like trying to make me be quiet, because you weren't supposed to show political allegiances at this time, and also it showed that obviously somebody must have been taking this toddler out to the marches, otherwise why would they know this? But I was shouting it, I felt, and I had this feeling this huge sense of fear, and I don't know what possessed me, but I have this feeling like I really did do this. My mum said, you did do this. So that's one memory a strange memory. It's almost like a nostalgia that I have. Well, we didn't need to escape because my mum wasn't as heavily involved in politics as my father was, involved in lots of movements and organising workers, and my dad also belonged to a group, a section of the Socialist Party, which I think they sort of had Marxist-Leninist tendencies, which was really frowned upon. I mean, the military dictatorship wanted anybody left-wing shot and killed. So this was not the right politics to have at that time. And when the militia had gone to the university and they'd taken, people away, because there's a student movement at the University of Conception in sort of intelligentsia, and they were very left wing, and so they were part of that fever of social justice, of, I don't know, the guerrilla spirit like Che Guevara and all that, whatever was fashionable in that sort of sense in terms of idealism. And my dad was in prison. Then they put him in home detention, and he had to sign, because his involvement wasn't fully understood at this time. A lot of people were getting tortured and whistleblowing on others, but at this point, when they released my dad into home detention, it was because they didn't know the extent of his involvement. So home detention is when you're allowed to go home, but you have to sign at the police station in the morning, sign in the evening, for example. So this is what my dad had to do. And then obviously, as more and more people were being taken prisoner, it became obvious that my dad knew that at some point somebody was going to whistleblow on him, his sort of involvement and his leanings and his politics. And in fact, the section of the Socialist Party that he belonged to believed in armed struggle as a last resort. So if there was a civil war, they believed that they should be able to fight. And that was, this was quite a tense time. Anyway, so Dad flees, and he goes to Peru at some point. So he's, at this stage, he's got to be about 25, 26 years old, something like that. And he manages to send some sort of word, I don't know how he gets it to my mum, but he lets my mum know that it's up to her if she wants to join him in Peru. That's up to her or not. And I think my mum, she could have stayed, but she thought, no, I'll join him. And at that point, they didn't know. I don't think anybody anticipated that this military dictatorship would go on for so many years. They didn't anticipate how brutal it would be. A lot of things were unknown at that time. So my mum decides to go. And my sister's a baby at this point. I'm a toddler. And she left everything in our house, all their possessions, everything, because it couldn't look like they were leaving or going away or anything like that. And she got on a coach from the south of Chile, being a young woman herself, with this toddler and baby, and left. And it's a very long trip. I don't know how many hundreds of miles it is. But just Chile is such a thin strip of a country. And there were lots and lots of military stops along the way, and they'd search the bus and search people, my mum tells me. So everybody was really, really quiet, sort of thing. It was a tense time, and I think it must have been quite uncomfortable. I can't imagine they had air conditioning or anything else like that on the coach. But the interesting thing is a lot of refugees leave without papers, without documents and papers. And of course, my parents would travel, so my mum had me and my sister on her passport, so it would look like she was just legitimately travelling with her correct papers. So I think my mum told me that eventually when they crossed, they crossed the border into Peru, and eventually they had the last stop, and then the last search on the bus, with the military going on and off and whatnot. My mum said there was this sort of huge relief on the bus, and people were suddenly talking, but the coach ride all the way had been like deadly silent. I actually don't know how she coped with it with a toddler and with a baby, because it must have been really uncomfortable. And then my dad was teaching in this swimming centre, and the story goes that some chap went to see him when he had a leather jacket or coat or something, and it was plain clothed, and I mean not in uniform, but the guy showed my dad his details or something, his identity, and he was a police officer, and he said something along the lines to my dad that they had 48 hours or something, not much time to leave the country, otherwise there might be problems for him and his family. There's no guarantee as to their safety. And of course my dad had to take that quite seriously. Well, we were being threatened, and so he went to the embassies, and I don't know how they do it, or I don't know how they apply for asylum, and he applied for Cuba, but the Cubans didn't want him because he wasn't communist. And then he applied to go to Russia, but the Russians didn't want us either because he wasn't a communist. And then he tried the Soviet Union. At that time it was the Soviet Union. And then he tried some other places, and then the last place that he tried was England, because he'd gone to an English school and called St. John's, so he was bilingual, he could speak English. And England hadn't taken its quota of refugees under the United Nations or sort of thing, and that's how we ended up on a aeroplane to England, and we came to England with no possessions or anything. And what I remember, I do remember the tension. I remember tension, real tension, nervousness, but I remember the aeroplane windows, and I just remember like children, just putting their hands on the window and knowing that this was going to be like a big journey, like a huge journey, and that there was that this was an ending of something. This black and white one, it's a picture of me and my mum, and we're by the river, the Rio Bio, which is at the bottom where we lived, our house. And I think what always strikes me about this picture, which actually I keep on my desk at work, but hidden, sort of just for me really, is it's just in this picture there's no notion that we would never be there again, that this home was going to be gone and that we would never be there again. And that was it, that this is actually probably the last year of my life in Chile, and for that matter my mum's. So you just can't tell, can you, that your life can change, in seconds. But as we all know, it's a sort of strange sort of cliche, but really that was, so I have this on my desk to remind me how life can change very quickly, and not to take things for granted.
Cantando esta samba con redoble libertario, mataron al guerrillero Che comandante Guevara. Selvas, pampas y montañas, patria o muerte su destino. Selvas, pampas y montañas,